Hello and welcome back to this in-depth episode of Daily Dose of EOS. I'm your host Jack Wales, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at Jack Wales. And today we're going to be taking a deeper look with our special guest Asphyxia at the stablecoin that's coming to the EOS network. This is just one part of a very long and interesting conversation covering multiple topics about EOS. If you want to check that out, link is in the description to Novusphere's channel where you can find the whole unedited version. Just a brief warning, the recording does begin in the middle of a conversation. The goal was to have the whole thing recorded, but because we're already talking about it, I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation. It starts with Asphyxia bringing up the point that eBTC is essentially IOU issued by BitPie. It's an IOU that if you given this token, you get a Bitcoin back in their wallet. So he brought up the point, what happens when the BitPie wallet gets hacked and they lose all the Bitcoin the Bitcoins? How would they back then, and what recourse does the user have to getting justice or some kind of compensation for their eBTC? That's it. Let's get started. Right.
So what happens if their real BTC gets hacked and stolen? You know, what's the recourse for the people holding eBTC on the EOS network?
Wait, but you're saying that if BitPie got hacked and lost their BTC, is what you're saying? Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid point. But I don't know, like they say that they're a very reputable wallet provider. They say they've been operating for 5 years. They're endorsed by Bitcoin.org. Who is running Bitcoin.org, by the way? Is that Roger Ver, or is that someone else?
Bitcoin.com is owned by Roger, but Bitcoin.org isn't.
Okay. Yeah, apparently they're endorsed by Bitcoin.org. Who are the guys behind Bitcoin.org?
Well, I mean, what do we mean by endorsed? If you mean like their wallet is on the Bitcoin.org site, it doesn't really take a whole lot to be on there.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I think that's what they meant. Yeah, it's just the wallets on there.
I wonder how Bitcoin.org would feel about that if they knew their name was being used like that.
I don't know. I don't know. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, oh, okay. So one bit eater. Hold up, okay. I just gotta make sure this information.
This is not a new thing, by the way, at all. Like on BitShares, there was multiple companies or organizations on BitShares that used to do this exact same thing, where they would take assets like Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever, and then they would issue an IOU on the BitShares network so that you were able to trade on the BitShares DEX using that asset.
Right. I mean, but like, was it useful? I mean, I will imagine like.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not useful. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying like it's very risky.
Yeah. That is true. Have any of the companies,
especially since they haven't outlined what their recourse is for if this were to happen. Right now, it's sort of just like, trust us that this won't happen. Right. So you're left with a what if. You don't know how they're going to handle it, right? So for example, when Bitfinex got hacked at one point, they shifted that entire liability onto their customers, right? They said, okay, thank you guys for being our customers. We're going to have to take some funds from all of you to cover our damages, and, we're going to give you an IOU.
What, like, does that IOU translate to them actually getting their money back?
So they didn't really ever get their money back entirely. They were forced to settle in USD with Bitfinex being hacked. So Bitfinex paid it back in USD, but mind you, they paid it back after the price of Bitcoin had like skyrocketed. So very similar to sort of what happened with the Mt. Gox scenario, where Mt. Gox eventually did have enough money to pay back all the creditors of Mt. Gox, but that's because all of those people were forcibly being paid back in fiat currency, Japanese yen, instead of being paid back in the amount of Bitcoin they lost on Mt. Gox.
So they paid in USD at the rate during when the exchange was hacked, not at the current rate.
Yeah, so okay, let me give you like a hypothetical scenario, right?
Right.
So imagine I'm BitPie, and okay, imagine I'm Bitfinex here, and I'm doing what BitPie does. So I have 1,000 BTC, and there's 1,000 EBTC, and I get hacked, and I lose half of my funds. So I only have 500 BTC, but there still exists 1,000 BTC or EBTC. So the way Bitfinex handled it is basically they took back forcibly, because it's centralized exchange, but I mean you can also do this on EOS due to the mutability of the contract. They took back half of the Bitcoin that all their customers had, again in this hypothetical scenario, and what they did was they gave them back an IOU token that was settled in fiat with the price of Bitcoin at that point in time, and they said eventually this IOU token will be redeemable for real US dollar. And the token was actually, interestingly enough, tradable. And so what Bitfinex's plan was that I think it was like every 2 months, they would pay or they would buy back some of the outstanding IOU tokens from the market. So they completely shifted the liability of their losses onto their customers, and they forced their customers to burden that responsibility. And the price of Bitcoin, by all means, skyrocketed. So let's say, the price of Bitcoin when, this hack happened was like only $1,000, and then the price of Bitcoin, let's say a couple months later, is $10,000. Well, okay, now it's a lot easier for me to settle this, but, do you really want I'm paying you back essentially I effectively forced you to sell half your Bitcoin at $1,000.
Okay, fair enough.
So that's what I meant by like they forced everyone to settle on a certain position, which obviously people are going to be mad about if the price goes up, and if the price goes down, well, maybe they're not so mad about it, but it would take forever for them to get paid back at the rate that Bitfinex was paying them back at.
Right. Okay, so you see the problem you see is that there's something like that might happen where the pilot get hacked and they haven't outlined what the recourse if that happens.
Yeah, we don't know how they're going to handle that scenario,
Right.
And I don't really think there is a good way for them to handle it. I mean, their options are either they stick their customers, the clients, with the liability, or they pay it out of pocket themselves. And they have all the incentive in the world to shift it onto their customers because they're not legally liable for it.
When you say legally not liable for it, like, is that just like probably in the terms of agreement they set up, or just there is no legal action that can be taken against them?
I think it has a lot to do with it's very difficult to take legal action against them given the assets that are involved in this. You don't really have a standard set on how to handle cases like this, so it would be a very long time for the legal process.
Okay, true. I mean, I guess like the only way you would do it, like a lot of people want a stable coin on EOS, and one of the ways to do it is kind of like what Steam did with the Steam dollars, right? Where you have like Steam tokens as collateral. I think it's something.
So, what's really interesting about that? Have you ever looked at a graph of Steam-backed dollars? Have you looked at the chart?
Like the price chart?
Yeah.
No, but not. I mean, I did, but I don't.
So it's supposed to be worth $1, right?
Yeah.
You take a look at the current price.
What's the token symbol for it?
I linked it to you in the chat.
Okay.
And at one point, Steam-backed dollars were even worth $13 a token.
Yeah. No, I remember seeing it like being above
So I'm
above
not
the.
exactly sure what's going on with this, but I think a good example, because okay, so after Dan left Steam, and I don't know the full history of Steam that well because I never really used the platform, so I'm like paraphrasing on like memory and things that I've read. But after Dan left Steam, they made a lot of changes as to how this system works, and I think a lot of that had to do with sorry, I think a lot of that affected the price of the Steam back dollars and how that system works. But Dan had this system of a collateralized back asset to issue a stablecoin. He created that concept way back on BitShares, and we had this with BitUSD and BitCNY. And then you had on Ethereum, you have DAI by MakerDAO, and MakerDAO and DAI are heavily based on the same concepts that Dan was using in BitShares, which was over collateralized assets and then essentially taking out a loan against those assets. And I don't know if you know this, but actually in the EOS white paper, it states, collateralized assets like that are a goal of EOS. So I expect at some point, God knows when, Block One is going to, put that out in terms of the software. But I think anyone at this point in time, if they were really trying to innovate or at least push decentralization, they could implement the exact same approach that MakerDAO uses and implement a version of DAI on EOS. And instead of Ethereum as collateral, you would use EOS as collateral.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think Higher Vibes is doing something like that. But I think they're not collateralizing with EOS tokens, or they are, or like it's a mix of the two. Like they have their token, and then they have the EOS, and they collateralize both to create a stable token. I think
Yeah,
that's
so
what.
I saw the eCash thing by Higher Vibes, but I have never had a chance to look
Yeah.
into it and how it works. What confused me about it was it seems that you earn eCash by staking Higher Vibes, and you don't really need to actually do anything other than, stake. So you're not running like software or anything like that. You are just locking up some tokens in a contract, and it's confusing to me, especially since like I said, I haven't actually looked into it, how exactly they're generating a stable coin for people doing that.
Well, they say it uses the same mechanism as Steam dollars. So I guess like when they're staking it, you are essentially putting it into like collateral, kind of like MakerDAO is like it's the same idea, right? You put in some Ethereum and you get these DAI tokens, which is like a stable coin.
That's it's not the same.
Sorry?
So with it's not the same. So with
Okay.
do you want me to turn the voice changer off for the time being since
No,
we're just talking here?
I'm actually recording you already, so this is perfect.
Oh, okay.
It was just an interesting conversation.
um,
I didn't want to interrupt, so
yeah, no problem.
yeah.
So if so uh with the higher vibes, from the way I understand, like the way it works is, you stake your higher vibes and you get back eCash, and this is done like essentially passively. Um, so after you're staking, eventually you can go and claim these rewards, but that's not how it works with DAI and Maker in that case. The way that works is you put up some amount of collateral. So let's say the price of Ethereum right now is $100, and so let's say you put up 10 Ethereum as your collateral. Um, so your loan can be up to, sorry, your collateral has to represent at least 150% of whatever your loan is. So what I mean by that is, so for example, um, if you have 10 Ethereum as your collateral, that's $1,000, right? So if you take $1,000 and one second, just give me 1 second here. So if you take $1,000 and you divide it by 1.5, so 150%, you get $666.
Mhm.
So that's the maximum amount that you could take out as a loan against your collateral.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, if the price moved below that just by a small amount, because then you'd be uh, above the 150% collateral, sorry, below it, um, then you'd be your collateral would be forcibly seized and auctioned off.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's not really a passive process. It's you're over collateralizing a position to
Mhm.
borrow money from the system essentially.
Mhm.
And the advantage of doing this is you don't actually have to sell your Ethereum.
Mhm.
So maybe I should re-explain that now, like now that I actually have my thoughts like better put together on it. Sorry about that. I was kind of all over the place.
No, no, no. I mean, I understand what you say. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I understand. I think the only thing is that, like, well, maybe this is using what you're saying is that the way eCash works is passive in the terms of that even if the value of the underlying asset fluctuates, nothing happens essentially.
Yeah, I have no idea how it works. It just from what I know, and from what I've seen, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'm completely wrong about this. Is it seems like you stake these tokens
Mm-hmm.
and you're given back a stable coin for staking your tokens
Mm-hmm.
over a period of time. And I don't know what the process behind the backing of what actually gives that stable coin value is and how just staking these coins produces that value, especially since you're not staking your coins to participate in validating a network or anything like that. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's essentially passive income. It's almost like a dividend almost. But it's
Mm-hmm.
not a dividend because it's not as if Higher Vibes has cash flow, in
Mm-hmm.
contrast to, let's say, some of these dice games or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm very confused as to where the money comes from, but I haven't read their paper or really looked extensively into their project to be able to say anything conclusively. So that's why I have to clarify everything I'm saying with, yeah, I could be entirely wrong about my understanding of Higher Vibes.
Yeah, no worry. I mean, I think, sorry, I think it's for them. It's probably just a way to use a familiar terminology. If I was doing this thing, how I imagine it would be working is that you stake your EOS with me, which is, like essentially I'm taking your EOS as a loan. You're loaning EOS to me, and I'm paying like interest in a stable token, or what's supposed to be a stable token. That's the way I would imagine how it works. Which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Like if you're an application developer and you need like the resources, let's say you have to stake for CPU or whatever. Let's say for the forum, right? We have an influx of users and we don't have enough CPU to cover the free account for everybody. We would.
I just realized I think we might have been talking about the wrong thing. I think what we were both talking about was Horus Pay, which is
Oh
the
yeah.
eCash one, not Higher Vibes.
Could be.
Yeah, I was just looking it up because I was trying to see if I could find anything as to an explanation of how eCash works.
Okay. Do you have a link to that?
Okay, I found the white paper. I'll put a link to it in our chat.
Okay.
And okay, it's only 7 pages, so it shouldn't take too long to skim through this.
It doesn't mention anything about stablecoins.
Okay, so they mention it in section 3.2.
Okay.
Which says, in order to access the portal, users need to stake Horus token every 30 days until Horus dollar, which I'm assuming is eCash in this case, reaches its distributed consensus of $1.2 billion, approximately 82 years. The Horus token will generate a digital asset called Horus dollar at a 0.1 interest rate. When Horus dollar reaches its distributed consensus, the Horus token will no longer be stakeable.
Okay.
So I still don't understand from reading that what actually gives the Horus dollar any value whatsoever. Aside from the fact that maybe the Horus dollar is usable in their platform, but this is, all under the assumption that they can convince people to use this Horus dollar and take it as a means of payment. So let me read 3.3. Hang on. So it says the payroll vendor can immediately exchange Horus dollars for fiat currency when they are paid. But so again, what I don't understand there is where's the money coming from that is doing this exchange? Right? Where's the money coming from? Where's the real fiat currency coming from that backs the eCash, the token that supposedly these vendors are cashing out on?
Okay. Yeah, that is true. That is a little strange.
But let me just re-explain, for clarity's sake, the whole MakerDAO thing and the difference here. Now that like I said, I have my thoughts together. So the way it works is your loan has to be, it can't be. You have to over collateralize your position. So if you borrow, let's say $500 from the system, you have to have at least $750 worth of Ethereum collateralized in the system. And if it slips under the 150% threshold, so let's say it goes to 140%, due to the price of Ethereum dropping, then your collateral is then auctioned off and sold. And that's how they maintain the peg, is the collateral is auctioned off if you fall under this 150% position. And the problem with that, which they also are very transparent about, and this is something Dan's also talked about back on BitShares, is you have the problem of what's called the Black Swan event. And the Black Swan event is an unforeseen market scenario that happens very quickly and it's very unprecedented, where, for example, if the price were to drop fast enough, DAI or this system would essentially lose its peg because the asset could not be auctioned off fast enough and it would be under collateralized after being auctioned off. And there is an interest rate associated with the system. I believe the current rate of DAI is 2.5% a year. And so when you go to pay back your loan, again, let's say we borrowed $500, and we paid it back a year later. Well, you'd be paying back, only 2.5% on that, which is like $12-13. So that's also how the people that have the maker token earn a profit from this, is the interest on the loans that are paid out.
Like one of the things I don't get, well, two things is that one of the things that people want from a stablecoin is to kind of, when they when they kind of want to, the market's doing bad, they don't want to hold a cryptocurrency anymore. They want to have a stable coin. But by taking out those DAO loans, you're still exposed to the market condition, which is if the value drops under 150%, it's going to get liquidated. So like.
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? So you don't have to take out a loan to get DAI, because you can always just buy DAI from someone else.
Right.
Right? There are people who will exploit the system of how DAI works, whether it's intentional or not, to use it effectively as a decentralized version of margin trading.
Okay.
And so what I mean by that is I'm effectively given a margin for my Ethereum in this case. So again, let's go back to the example of using 10 Ethereum, right? And the price is, let's say, $100. So, I have $1,000 of Ethereum locked up in collateral. I take out a loan of 500, and with that loan, I go and buy 5 more Ethereum. So in total, I have 15 Ethereum, but 10 of it's locked up in the loan. So let's say the price of Ethereum goes up to maybe $200 for easy math. Well, okay, so now I can sell my 5 Ethereum for $1,000. I can pay back the loan, which was 500. Let's ignore the interest rate for simple math here. And now I have an additional $500 plus my original 10 Ethereum that I started with. So I can use it as a margin position.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
And there are people who will use it that way, right? So there are people that will take out a loan to buy more Ethereum or to buy more of a cryptocurrency. And you have to also remember that people who are getting margin called and their assets are being seized. So, for example, your collateral falls under the 150%. Your asset is being auctioned off. The Ethereum, right, is being auctioned off for DAI. So it creates liquidity for DAI on the market. So maybe in your case, what you talked about is you don't actually want to take out a loan. You just want to buy DAI, right? Which is what the Oasis DEX that MakerDAO has is for. So in this case, where you just want to peg to a stable currency, you just buy DAI. You don't take out a loan.
Okay. That's very interesting, actually. I haven't looked into how DAI works just because it seemed very, very complicated. But now that you explain it to me, it all makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, so interestingly enough, when I took a look at DAI, it came across to me as very confusing. And I actually remember I had shown it to Brian a long time back, and I knew that he has more of a background in finance and this sort of thing, so I actually asked him to explain it to me. And so I got a pretty good understanding about it after he explained it to me, and I read a little bit more about it myself.
You asked Brian to explain it to you?
Sorry, say it again?
You asked Brian to explain it to you?
Yeah, because I had shown it to Brian and I asked him what's his thoughts on this. Like, does it seem like it'll work? Because I showed it to him when DAI had was just coming out, like when Maker was just coming out and going public with everything. Everyone's was skeptical about it because the biggest problem with BitUSD and BitCNY, which is what DAI was based on, was liquidity. BitUSD and BitCNY didn't have a good liquidity system. It didn't have this sort of feedback loop to provide liquidity in terms of seizing loans and selling them off and that sort of thing. And so this was a concern that I had about DAI, and then I sent it to him to take a look at, and he said it seemed like it was a really good idea and that it should work, without assuming there aren't any black swan events. And so again, I asked him to explain this, and as he was explaining it, I actually remembered that Dan had explained something very similar back when he was talking about BitUSD and BitCNY.
Okay, so go back to the auction. When it's auctioned off, is essentially using that Ethereum to buy back DAI? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So for example, so let's say it falls below the threshold. Okay, so let's say we'll use a really good example here. So let's say I locked up $1,000 worth of Ethereum, so 10F at $100, let's say, and I took out a loan of 666, which is 150% of that would be $1,000. So literally, I'm on the very border of it. So let's say the price of ETH drops, let's say $5, and the MakerDAO system is running its rounds.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'm under the collateral at this point. So what's going to happen is my 10 ETH, which is now $95, so it's worth a total of $950. What the Maker DAO system is going to try to do is it's going to try to auction off and sell my Ethereum onto the market for 950 DAI. So people that are participating in the Maker system are going to want to participate in this auction, right? Because if you think about an auction, let's say I decide to auction off one Ethereum to a bunch of people. The auction should logically trend towards the actual market rate of Ethereum,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because we have liquid markets for Ethereum USD.
Okay.
So essentially, the system is then able to reclaim DAI from the public, as well as releasing the Ethereum that was held for the collateral.
Okay. No, that part makes sense. The only part that I am a little confused about is that when you talk about this market, where is this market that exists? This is
Give me
not
one sec.
this is not like an open exchange, right? Like, because there's no
It is.
central. It is an open exchange.
Yeah, hang on. So that's the exchange ran that's associated with the Maker DAO system. So you can read a little bit about it here as well, and you can see their pairs on CoinMarketCap. So the exchange is literally for the purpose of providing price stability and doing this auction sort of thing between Ethereum and DAI and Maker.
Okay, and this is exchange on the Ethereum network?
Yeah, it's a decentralized exchange.
Ah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, okay, that was the only question I was thinking, like, if is this like marketplace you're talking about on the network itself, or is it a like a open public kind of centralized exchange? But yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, I think we should probably implement something like this, but probably block that one's doing it.
Yeah, so like I said before, in the ESO.io white paper, they did mention stablecoins. So I would expect Block One to come out with something similar to this at some point.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that is a very interesting system, and it seems, I mean, it seems to work for Ethereum, so I don't see why it wouldn't work for EOS. The only thing is, like you said, that Black Swan event where the price drops by, like, I don't know, 75%, and then it couldn't liquidate fast enough, and everything just goes to shit.
Yeah, it has to be a flash crash that's sustained. It can't just be like a flash crash that bounces back up because of how the system works. If the flash crash isn't sustained, it won't actually affect DAI. But if we see a flash crash of like 90%, like overnight, that could be very problematic.
I mean,
Or
what's
at least
this?
that's my understanding of it.
But that's not like unthinkable, right? This is crypto we're talking about. Like, it's not like we haven't had
I
this
think
before.
in some of the less liquid cryptocurrencies,
Uh-huh.
that's very possible. But I think given the fact that Ethereum has been around for so long, it's had enough time to become a little more well distributed in terms of its coin distribution, per holder. So I think there's a less case, or there's not as likely of a case of having a sustained crash that happens very quickly. That's not to say we can't lose, 90% of the market cap. I mean, look at what's happened over the last, couple months. But this was a process that happened, losing a couple percent every day.
Right, right, right. Okay, okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add to that conversation.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find the part about the stable coin assets that I remember seeing.
on the EOS white paper?
Yeah. Or at least I remember seeing something like that, but maybe it's somewhere else that I'm thinking. Because I'm skimming through the white paper right now and I'm not seeing it in there.
I don't remember reading something like that, actually. And then, like, it would be strange to include it in the white paper because I think this is more of the outline of the technical aspects of the software rather than like I would imagine something like a die would be like a more of a product thing along the lines of Steam and that kind of stuff. So that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, this is only one part of a very long conversation. Link down below if you want to find the full version at Novusphere's channel. As always, if you liked the video and you found it informative, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and you're watching this and you haven't done already, hit the subscribe button. I've been your host, Jack, and I'll see you tomorrow.